I let my ex-wife think she'd won custody until the judge saw the evidence I'd been gathering for years. The divorce papers were sitting on my kitchen table for 3 weeks before I finally signed them. Every morning I'd sit there with my coffee, staring at those documents while my 2 kids ate their cereal and got ready for school. They had no idea their world was about to be turned upside down, and I was desperately trying to figure out how to protect them from what was coming. My ex-wife had been planning this divorce for months, maybe even years, while I was completely oblivious to what was happening. She'd been meeting with lawyers, gathering financial records, and building her case while I was focused on trying to save our marriage. When she finally told me she wanted out, she already had everything mapped out, including her strategy to get full custody of our kids. At first, I thought the custody arrangement would be straightforward, since we'd both been involved parents throughout our marriage. I coached our son's little leg team, helped with homework every night, and never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. But my ex had other plans, and she started making moves I never saw coming. She began documenting every small mistake I made as a parent, every time I was 5 minutes late picking them up, every instance where I had to work late or travel for business. She started taking photos of dirty dishes in the sink, unmade beds, and anything else that might make me look like an unfit parent. Meanwhile, she was presenting herself as the perfect mother who did everything right. The character assassination campaign started subtly but escalated quickly. She'd make comments to our mutual friends about how I was never really present as a father, how I'd rather work than spend time with the kids, how she'd basically been a single mother for years. These stories were complete fabrications, but she told them so convincingly that some people started believing her version of events. What really hurt was watching how she manipulated our children during this process. She'd ask them leading questions about which parent they preferred living with, plant seeds of doubt about my parenting abilities, and make subtle comments about how much easier their lives would be if they just lived with her full-time. The kids were confused and scared, caught between 2 parents who were supposed to be protecting them. My initial lawyer was expensive but ineffective, more interested in billable hours than actually fighting for my rights as a father. He kept pushing for a quick settlement, telling me that fathers rarely get significant custody time and that I should just accept whatever arrangement my ex was proposing. I fired him after 3 months and decided to represent myself, which everyone said was a huge mistake. But representing myself gave me something my lawyer never had: complete control over my case and unlimited time to prepare. I started researching family law, studying successful custody cases, and learning everything I could about building a compelling argument. More importantly, I started paying attention to things I'd been missing about my ex-wife's behavior and character. The first thing I noticed was how differently she acted when she thought no one was watching. When we'd meet for custody exchanges, she'd be sweet and cooperative if other parents were around, but cold and hostile when it was just us. She'd make unreasonable demands about pickup times, cancel visits at the last minute, and then blame me for being inflexible or uncooperative. I started keeping detailed records of every interaction we had, every text message, every email, every phone call. I documented her patterns of behavior, her inconsistencies, and her attempts to manipulate situations to make me look bad. What I discovered was that she'd been playing a long game, building a narrative that would support her custody case. But the more I dug into her recent behavior, the more I realized there were things about our marriage I'd completely missed. She'd been secretive about her phone, protective of her computer, and vague about her whereabouts during times when she claimed to be doing things for the kids. I'd attributed this to stress from the divorce, but now I was starting to suspect there was more to the story. The breakthrough came when I was helping my son with a school project and found some old photos on our shared computer. Mixed in with family pictures were screenshots of text conversations between my ex and someone whose name I didn't recognize. The messages were clearly romantic in nature, and the timestamps showed they'd been going on for over 2 years, well before she'd asked for the divorce. I spent the next several nights going through every digital trace I could find, and what I discovered was a full-blown affair that had been going on for most of our marriage. She'd been meeting this person regularly, sometimes when she claimed to be at parent meetings or school events. She'd used our joint credit cards to pay for hotel rooms and expensive dinners, charges I'd never questioned because I trusted her completely. The most damaging evidence was a series of conversations where she discussed her divorce strategy with her affair partner. She'd laid out her plan to get full custody, how she was going to paint me as an absent father, and how she was going to use the kids as weapons to hurt me. She'd even joked about how naive I was, how easy it would be to manipulate the situation in her favor. But what made me absolutely sick was reading her discussions about the children. She talked about them like they were possessions, to be won rather than human beings with their own needs and feelings. She described how she was coaching them to say negative things about me, how she was rewarding them for rejecting time with their father, and how she planned to eventually move far away to limit my access to them. I realized that everything she'd been doing wasn't about protecting the children, or even about wanting to be with them full time. It was about herding me, controlling the narrative, and winning what she saw as a competition. The kids were just pawns in her game, and she was willing to damage their relationship with their father to achieve her goals. Armed with this new information, I completely changed my custody strategy. Instead of just defending myself against her accusations, I started building a case that showed who she really was and what her true motivations were. I gathered evidence of her affair, her financial deceptions, and most importantly, her manipulation of our children. The custody evaluation process was brutal, but I was prepared for it in ways my ex never expected. When the evaluator asked about my parenting philosophy, I had detailed examples of my involvement in the kids' lives, complete with photos, school records, and documentation of my attendance at their activities. When she made accusations about my fitness as a parent, I had evidence that contradicted every claim. But I didn't reveal everything I knew right away. I let her build her case, let her commit to her version of events, and let her think she was winning. She became overconfident, making increasingly dramatic claims about my parenting failures and her superior abilities as a mother. She even brought character witnesses who testified about what a devoted mother she was and how much better the children would be with her. The judge seemed initially sympathetic to her arguments, and I could see the satisfaction on her face as she presented her case. She thought she'd successfully painted me as the villain and herself as the victim. Her lawyer was confident, her witnesses were compelling, and her emotional testimony about wanting to protect the children was convincing. Then it was my turn to present evidence, and I systematically dismantled every argument she'd made. I showed the judge the text messages between her and her affair partner, including the ones where she discussed her custody strategy. I presented financial records showing how she'd used our children's college funds to pay for her affair. I played audio recordings of her coaching the kids to say negative things about me. The most powerful evidence was a recording I'd made of her telling our son that his father didn't really love him, that I was only fighting for custody to avoid paying child support, and that he'd be better off if he just forgot about me entirely. The judge's expression changed completely when he heard that recording, and I could see my ex's confidence crumble as she realized how much evidence I had against her. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally or taken out of context, but every piece of documentation I presented was completely legitimate. I'd been careful to only use evidence that was legally obtained and properly authenticated. Her attempts to discredit the evidence only made her look more desperate and manipulative. The final blow came when I presented evidence of her plan to move across the country with the children immediately after gaining custody. She'd already been looking at houses, researching schools, and even interviewing for positions in another state. Her plan was to get full custody and then make it practically impossible for me to maintain a relationship with my kids. The judge took a recess to review all the evidence, and when he returned, his ruling was swift and decisive. Not only did he award me primary custody, but he also restricted her visitation rights and ordered her to pay child support. He stated that her manipulation of the children and her attempts to alienate them from their father were forms of emotional abuse that he couldn't ignore. The courtroom was completely silent as the judge explained his reasoning. He talked about how the children's best interests had to come first, how both parents should support the children's relationship with the other parent, and how he'd seen clear evidence that one parent was actively trying to damage that relationship. My ex-wife's face went white as she realized she'd lost everything she'd been fighting for. But the judge wasn't finished. He also addressed her financial misconduct, ordering her to repay the money she'd taken from the children's college funds and imposing penalties for her deceptive behavior during the divorce proceedings. He made it clear that her actions had consequences that went beyond just the custody arrangement. Walking out of that courtroom with my kids was one of the most emotional moments of my life. They were confused about what had happened, but relieved that the uncertainty was finally over. I promised them that we'd work together to heal from everything that had happened, and that I'd always be honest with them about the situation. The transition wasn't easy for anyone, especially the children who had to adjust to living primarily with me while still maintaining a relationship with their mother. I had to undo months of emotional manipulation and help them understand that loving both parents was okay, even when those parents couldn't get along with each other. My ex-wife's life fell apart pretty quickly after the custody decision. Her affair partner wanted nothing to do with her once her true character was exposed publicly. She lost several friendships when the details of her manipulation became known. Even her own family started questioning her version of events once they learned about the evidence I'd presented. The financial consequences were severe too. Between the child support payments, the money she had to repay to the college funds, and the legal fees from her failed custody battle, she was in a much worse position than if she'd just agreed to shared custody from the beginning. Her greed and desire for control had cost her everything she'd been fighting for. But the most satisfying part wasn't her downfall. It was watching my children slowly return to being normal kids again. They stopped walking on eggshells around me, stopped asking leading questions about my feelings toward their mother, and started just being themselves. The relationship I'd been afraid of losing was not only preserved, but actually grew stronger through the process. I learned that sometimes the best strategy isn't to fight every battle as it comes, but to be patient, gather information, and wait for the right moment to present your case. My ex-wife's overconfidence and willingness to lie under oath became her downfall. She'd been so focused on winning that she'd forgotten the truth would eventually come out. The kids still have a relationship with their mother, which I encouraged despite everything that happened. They deserve to love both parents, and I won't make the same mistakes she did by trying to poison them against her. But they're old enough now to see the differences in how we handle situations and treat other people. Years later, I sometimes wonder if things could have been different if my ex-wife had been honest from the beginning. If she'd admitted to the affair, agreed to reasonable custody arrangements, and focused on what was best for the children instead of what would hurt me most, everyone would have been better off. But her need for control and revenge blinded her to the consequences of her actions. The experience taught me that sometimes people will show you who they really are if you just pay attention and give them enough rope. My ex-wife's true character was revealed not through my efforts to expose her, but through her own actions and words. I just made sure those actions and words were properly documented and presented to the person who needed to see them. Looking back, I'm grateful for how everything turned out, despite the pain and stress of the process. My children are happy, healthy, and thriving in an environment where they don't have to choose sides or navigate adult manipulation. They've learned valuable lessons about honesty, consequences, and the importance of treating others with respect, even when relationships end. The custody battle was never really about winning or losing. It was about protecting my children from someone who was willing to use them as weapons in an adult conflict. By letting her think she was winning while I gathered evidence of her true character, I was able to ensure that justice was served and that my kids would grow up in a healthier environment.